All right, we're here for another Clean Technica YouTube chat. I'm Zachary Shahan. This is Steve Hanley, Paul Foss, and Larry Evans. You can find all their work on cleantechnica.com. Someone asked last week for more info background on who everyone is. That would be a long that would be a long intro, but let's just say you have very strong but varied backgrounds, and you've all been following or covering even the electric vehicle and clean tech industries for over a decade, I think. I'm pretty positive Larry has as well, but I know if Paul and Steve have. But yeah, we all have different areas of expertise we bring to the table. But today we're talking a sort of simple matter, EV sales trends. So it's not as complicated as the manufacturing topic of last week, but it's definitely it's one of those crystal ball topics. Everyone can always talk about it. No one ever really knows what the future holds. So it's fun, it's interesting, but we're going to highlight a number of long term trends, not just recent trends, and sort of see what where we go from there. I'll kick things off with the U.S. sales, and I'll start with a couple of three quick notes. So, and then see what you guys have to say about these things. One is clearly we are in a very weird period in the U.S. Electric car market because we had the pretty. It wasn't sudden because everyone expected it for months, but the U.S. EV tax credit up to $7,500 per car was killed, and it expired. It finished at the end of September, and that created a big surge in EV sales in the third quarter. But we expect a huge drop off in EV sales in the fourth quarter, and then I think the big question mark is what's after that? What's the first and second quarter of next year look like, and then even more so like third quarter and beyond. But from that surge, we have electric cars, pure electric cars, full battery electrics, reached a record high of 10.5% share of the U.S. auto market, which really is not that it's not that big, compared to what we're seeing globally in China, Europe. It's still a pretty low. It's a little disappointingly low from my perspective, but it is a new record high. A lot of companies had record EV sales. Several companies actually had their sales drop year over year. So they just apparently did not plan for the surge, did not have the cars available to sell, or just did a really poor job marketing their EVs. A few companies did extremely well, which I covered today. I put out a report on share of the EV market among different brands. And the most notable highlight there is that Tesla dropped to 40.8% share of the US EV market. I remember when it was taking 80 to 90% of the US EV market, and that dropped to 70 and then 60. It's been a long-term trend. So there's one of the big questions today is like, where is Tesla going? What's the future of Tesla in the US? And then another interesting one for me was Hyundai and Kia had big sales surge, one of the biggest growth in share of the EV market in the third quarter, but it has had a dramatic drop off in October. They report monthly sales, one of the few companies that do still, which is not surprising, but not good. And then the flip side of that, interestingly, was that Ford also dropped sales year over year and quarter over quarter, of course, but it didn't have like nearly the drop in EV sales drop off that Hyundai and Kia had, which I found interesting and made me wonder, does Ford have a brighter future than expected? It's also weird because Ford has talked about demand drying up or dropping, and how it's going to produce fewer EVs than was planning before. So a lot of topics on the table there. I tried to spurt them all out real quick. We'll jump around and see what you guys have to say about these or other matters. I'll start with Steve because he's directly above me, and then we'll go clockwise.
Well, Zach, one of the things I think we might look at to try and get some clarity on this is what happened in Germany when they suddenly revoked their EV benefits, which I think was at the end of 2023. And not surprisingly, EV sales in Germany fell off a cliff. But then they came back, and I think that's essentially what's going to happen in the U.S. I expect the fourth quarter to be dismal. I expect the first quarter of next year to have a pulse. And I think by the time we get into next summer, there's so many new cars coming. I would expect that we should be back to roughly where we were before the incentives went away.
And any particular thoughts before we move on those brands or other brands, Ford, Hyundai, Kia, or Tesla?
Nope. It's
Okay.
jump balls too hard to tell.
Okay.
But personally, I think Tesla is doing the worst job of playing to the market and sticking with its long-term plan. Uh, I don't see any new cars, any new models on the horizon from Tesla, other than variations of the 3 and the Y. Um, the only bright spot was a suggestion from Robin Denholm last week that maybe, just maybe, there would be something like the Cybercab, but that would have a steering wheel and pedals. Right? Whether that's the Model 2, I mean, frankly, the Cybercab with the scissors doors and only 2 seats, I don't know who they're going to sell that to.
Paul?
Oh, I do have quite a few comments. I do think my general view on Chevy, Ford, and Stellantis is they're just fine having sales drop off of their EVs 50 or even 70%, and just making money on gas cars and some hybrids. I do think Ford and Chevy do have a plan for, let's say, 2 years out to have competitive electric cars because they realize what's going on in China and know that, we only have so much time before um, somebody sneaks Chinese cars in here, maybe not direct from China, but through some third country. Um, well, it could even be a Chinese plant in the US, or it could be a Chinese plant in Mexico. There's a lot of ways they could sneak in here. Um, so certainly Chevy and Ford have talked about that, they need to get competitive with China, but I'm not as optimistic as Steve are that their sales will have recovered by next summer. I think they're just kind of giving up. Hyundai, I don't think they're giving up, but they've also made announcements like, I think, was it the EV3 they were going to bring into the US, and
Four? Yeah.
they decided not to, based, I think, frankly, on the tax credit. So they're also slowing down. I actually wrote in an article when I was looking around Denver about Ford. I don't think the Ford Mustang Mach-E um, qualified for the 7,500. So that's one reason they're not seeing the big drop off. They didn't have the big increase to drop off. So
I will say with that one, that's a weird issue because there weren't actually a lot of models that qualified straight up, but like every
Mhm.
model you could get a lease and have it applied. Like there was a leasing
okay,
loophole,
you
so
could do
everyone could
that.
have it applied through a lease. But then there's different.
The dealers I saw, that the GM dealer was selling EVs like mad. The Hyundai and Kia were selling like mad. The Tesla was selling like mad. The Ford guy was like, yeah, we're selling a few. So I mean, obviously that's anecdotal.
Yeah.
Um, okay, then of course Tesla. Now I don't agree with what Zach said. I mean, I agree. He said that Tesla is in a long-term downtrend in market share. I mean, that's just math is math. But if you look at where things will be 9 months from now, I just said many of their competitors just gave up on EVs. Uh, Tesla can't back off to hybrids um, or gas cars, so they're not giving up on EVs. What Steve said was correct. They're they're not doing a great job of coming out with new models. So, um, eh, so he's 100% right there. Uh, I at one time thought that Tesla was going to come out on October 1st and have aggressive lease deals, and the Model Y and the Model 3 Standard were going to be amazing deals. Obviously, we were all kind of disappointed with that. But instead, I think they just said, anybody who's going to buy in October already bought in September, and they just kind of wrote off the month of October. So we'll get into November and December, and I think they'll just do their traditional give free options, offer lower interest rates, offer inventory discounts, and offer aggressive leases. So I think their fourth quarter will be down from the third quarter, but maybe only 25%, where Ford, Chevy, Stellantis, and Kia, since they have gas cars to sell, their EV sales will be down, let's say 50, 60%. I put here, and this is a little more longer term, when you go into first quarter and beyond, Tesla thinks, hey, V14 of FSD is going to be so good, we won't have to lower prices or come out with new models. That'll just drive sales by itself. And I will define my view pretty precisely. If they can get it to level 3 so I can text and watch YouTube on my phone, it will drive sales. If they can't, all it is a little bit better, but I still have to watch the thing every second. So it's all whether they can get to level 3 or not. And if they can't, as Steve said, they're kind of in trouble. They've got no new models. And the Standard isn't that great, but they don't have a backup plan, so they'll just have to cut prices on what they have. I do have one other story, but let me let Larry in because I've been talking a long time.
Yeah, sorry about that. My wife keeps calling me on 16 different phones. So I think that an important thing to look at here is not just what the sales were last month in this sales, but like look at what moves that organizations are making. When thinking about GM and Ford and Stellantis, you have to think about their overall business model, and their business model is by getting these EVs on the road, then I get the ZEV credits in California, which have gone away, and I get the CAFE credits, which have gone away, that let me sell a whole bunch of ICE vehicles. And that includes pickup trucks and SUVs and everything else like that. So if you look at GM especially, they said they were variable cash profitable, which means their variable costs are less than what they sell the vehicle for, which doesn't mean they're gross profitable. That means that they could eventually get to gross profitability if they sold enough vehicles to cover their fixed costs. It's only covering their variable costs. So they were losing money on this. By all accounts, Ford was losing money, and so was Stellantis, but they could make money overall by selling ICE vehicles. So when you think about it that way, and you think that that justification has gone away, now they have to look at a completely different model that would be profitable on its own without that business value of selling ICE vehicles. That's quite a challenge for a company like that. And, if you look at China, everyone's like, oh, China, they're all losing money. NIO's still making gross profit, which is better than Ford and GM, even though they're losing money net. So like a lot of these companies are losing money, but they're still making that back. And I think without a business model based on a product that's going to be profitable under its own power, you have a hard time building up overall growth. If you look at GM, they canceled BrightDrop, they closed that plant, they've shuttered a number of other plants, they've laid off thousands of people. There's just news out of, I believe, Indiana, where they had a Samsung SDI plant where they were going to make batteries. They stopped construction on that, or they paused construction on that, laid off a bunch of construction workers. So there are all of these things that's showing that GM is not ramping up to get the level of volume that would get them to profitability under their previous business model. Now, what that new business model evolves into is going to be a good question. But based off of what the moves they're making corporately, I don't anticipate them having a breakout year in sales. The other thing I would say is that even though we're focusing on the consumer $7,500 tax credit, those aren't the only incentives on the books. There are a number of incentives that go to manufacturers. There's the 45X tax credit. That's $45 for the battery pack, split $10 for the pack itself, 35 for the cells, and then there's the electrode tax credits, and these are transferable tax credits. So it's like giving someone cash because they can sell it to somebody. It's not just offsetting their tax bill. So that adds up to roughly the cost of battery cells in China. So that's a significant amount of a tax credit, but they put additional limitations on that in terms of which partners you can have and still qualify for that under Trump, even though that still exists. The other thing that goes into that is there's the 48C tax credit, and that is for manufacturing facilities. And 48C covers 30% of the cost under another transferable tax credit. But because of the Trump changes on that, you're looking at not everyone qualifying anymore based off of foreign participation within joint ventures, which could be throwing some of these things off. You're also looking at deadlines being much stronger and it would disqualify you. You'd have to pay back the tax credit. So anyone who's pausing any kind of manufacturing ramp up, it indicates that they're not just pausing. It means either that they're not going to try and get this subsidy anymore and they're just stringing it along, or it means that they're potentially canceling this, or at least having a very significant pause in that now they won't qualify for the government incentive by having that pause. I don't feel very hopeful about these production changes leading to sales. They have smarter people there than I am. Like, you have all these people crunching the numbers. Here's how many I can sell. Here's how much I have. It doesn't look encouraging based on that. Tesla hasn't grown its production capacity. There's debate like last week in terms of if they can grow internally by using smarter methods. I have some questions on that. I talked to Paul before. When I went to dealership, they had a lot of inventory there. It seems like they are not inventory constrained at all in the US. So it'll be interesting to see what the dynamic is there. Do they kind of string that out? Do they try and get higher sales? They also aren't getting the regulatory credit revenue from selling those regulatory credits to ICE makers. So it's not looking very encouraging. The big question in my mind is what happens when we come out the other side? All of these tax credits are set to start phasing out in 2030. Trump hopefully will still not be president in 2030. What happens when we come out the other side? And I think Stellantis, because they're an international organization, they have some of these partnerships with other in global product. They could come back in and really kind of drive EV sales in 2030. I think Hyundai, Kia, they have strong product globally. They could come in. You have a number of organizations who have strong partnerships globally who could come in once we get to the other side. But with China looking at 60% EV sales potentially next year, I think we'll be lucky to break 10 if I were to look at the overall market.
Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff there. I would say with the manufacturing tax credits, that was a big thing we covered for batteries. Battery, yeah, when the IRA was passed. So it was really, like you said, you can get a tax credit for the battery pack, you can get for the battery cell, you can get for the components of the battery cell for like lithium production or refining. So you could really stack these up, and like you said, like the financial benefit basically could add up to the full cost of a battery produced in China, and that immediately led to changes globally. European battery factories were canceled, and companies decided to build those factories in the U.S. instead. Of course, there's it takes a long time to do that, and I think companies assumed that those would last no matter what happened, and I don't really I'm not sure right now with the different factory pauses or limbo state that we're in with them. I wonder how much they're trying to figure out what's happening with tariffs and international trade deals, and how much they're just like, okay, we got to figure out what happens with this first before we make any more decisions. And unfortunately, like that just is like a yo-yo. It's like it's there's no consistent clarity on what's happening with tariffs or with the trade deal with China or whatnot. So yeah, I would assume that the longer this goes on, or the more there are tariffs, the less likely these factories end up lasting or growing. Whereas if there was suddenly like, hey, I won on the tariff thing, and we're not, and blah blah blah. If it was this big show of we're done with the tariff war, on to something else, and it was a decent agreement, like maybe these get revived, maybe because they've kept these credits, which is an interesting component, maybe these factories keep moving along, and then that enables competitive EVs in the US more. So I think that is sort of like the biggest X factor probably. But then globally, there's always been the issue of like, if these companies are working on producing EVs, scaling them up, making them a bigger portion of their business, it's easiest to get those sales in China and in Europe, and even now in like 100 other markets, because there's more predictability, there's less barriers to trade, there's more of an open market for them, less captured market. So I think it will remain the case that the US is just like it's like a worst case market for a lot of these automakers, where they will sell EVs if they can, but they're not necessarily going to look to be the leaders in the EV market here unless something changes dramatically. So I think that's sort of what we're all saying, but anyone want to chime in on that before yeah, go ahead, Larry.
I think that a very important aspect of is the shifting policy. If you have one policy, I can figure out how to make it work. The problem that we had in the US is even after we had subsidies that were more than the total cost of batteries, our batteries were still more expensive after the subsidies. Just because of how expensive it was, we were not competitive in making batteries. So then what you end up happening is all of these companies turn to partners to come together and manufacture in the US. Then you put new restrictions on foreign ownership, and then all these partnerships. Now I had a viable business model to have cost-effective batteries. Now they're not as viable anymore because you had this shift. And
I think that was even a challenge under Biden, like figuring out those details of that. But then the other thing I was going to point out is like, every business wants predictability. Every business, they want to know the rules of the game and then decide what they're going to do. And we have such an extreme level of unpredictability right now in the US with business in general, with all kinds of matters. Visas, people here like legally on visas to do stuff and getting arrested or deported. We actually have a writer on our team who knows 2 people who have been here legally to do stuff, to do work, and been detained, and one deported. The other one, they had the company had a lawyer come and deal with the situation for hours to keep him here. But it's just an extreme case. It's just an extreme anti-business environment. So I think there's no reasonable belief that could change. Like you can think maybe that will get better in the next year or two, but the history with Trump as president is he loves to be unpredictable and combative, and that's not going to change. So I think for businesses in general, anything outside of like a given, this is an easy win, I think they're going to hold off. So I think that's going to really hurt our EV growth. But then there's a question of like, if these automakers know the future is better electric vehicles, they see the battery cost trends and everything, are they not inspired or pushed at all to like be okay? We're going to take advantage of this poor market and lead in it, so that when it is a big market or when it is a good market, we will be the clear leaders along with Tesla, basically. But
I
yeah,
can introduce some optimism here, and we may or may not want to end on that optimism. Both the Nissan Leaf and the Chevy Bolt, in the short term, are nice, affordable products. And Ford has also mentioned that they really want to get their costs down to be competitive with China. The other thing is that they will, once they have great products designed for foreign markets, they can bring those to the US market, and they don't have to spend $1 billion designing them because they'll be fully designed. I know there'll still be manufacturing issues. And then the last, I know we're saying the US in EVs is going to be behind, but between what Waymo is doing and what Tesla hopes to do, we may have more automated taxis, maybe not more than China, but we may have more than anywhere else in the world. So we may be a leader in that area.
yeah, I think the point on the new Nissan Leaf, the Chevy Equinox EV, and the Chevy Bolt, I mean, these are really getting into categories where the range has gone up a lot, the size and equipment has gone up a lot, and the cost has stayed down while the rest of the auto market costs have gone up. So I think these are increasingly on the verge of being like disruptive. I don't know if that's the right term, but potentially really, really well high selling, high demand EVs. As but we'll see. Steve, you've got a Chevy Bolt and you've had a Nissan Leaf. Any thoughts on these cars or others in the market?
Well, I'm curious. The new, the latest generation Nissan Leaf is reportedly a pretty good car, and it starts under $30,000. Um, we had a 2014 Nissan Leaf. It was not a great vehicle. It had about 72 miles of range, unless the weather was cold or the wind was against you. But we learned to adjust, and it served us. It got us started with the EV experience. Um, I just, I'm not sure with the Chevy Bolt. GM has said something about how the new car is going to have a limited production run, and I don't know what that
Yeah.
means.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody knows what that means. I think that it could mean we're going to see if we can sell any of these cars, and if we can't, the hell with it.
Yeah. Yeah, the downside is they've sort of under-delivered repeatedly, including Hyundai Kia, where you think, oh, this is a really good EV that could really, if they market this well, it could sell in high volumes, and they just continue to under-deliver for me for the past decade, all of these brands, in terms of volumes. Well, let's jump to the beast, Tesla, because I think this is really, I mean, I'm right with you, Paul. I agree with, I think I'm in the same boat as you. Um, there are people who like swear by full self-driving that they love it and they like, but I still feel like this is a really small portion of people. Like if I'm using it, it's more stressful and more annoying than just driving myself. I'm glad that someone agrees, because sometimes you talk to people who make it sound like, and I just worry about them like not paying attention at a key
I'm
moment.
relaxed on the highway because it's so good on the highway that I can really relax.
Well, it's
But in
not
the
even that.
city,
Well,
I am more stressed sometimes if I have it on than if I don't.
Well, there's two components of that. For one, like I'm doing what you're supposed to. I have my foot like hovering over the pedal, because if it's sitting back out of the way, it's not ready to do anything if I need to do anything. So I do what you should do, I think, and you have your foot like hovering over the pedal, which is less comfortable than having your foot on the pedal. Um, you're also like
100%.
you're also having to pay attention to anything weird it does. And like I turned mine on recently, and it decided to straddle the lane. It was a 2-lane road, 2-lane in each direction road with a median in the middle, and there was like no traffic. And for some reason, it decided to sort of drift over and straddle the middle line. And I don't know. I mean, I don't have hardware 4, but I have, so I was like, what the heck is this? Like, so there's different situations. Other people, they never have issues. They swear they use it everywhere. They turn off, but I don't, but my point was, I think that's a slim percentage, but I do agree that if they got to a point where you were legally allowed and they dealt with the liability, supposedly, to text or watch something while it operated, that would spike demand. I think that would spike demand for Teslas. Without that, they had really interesting sales in the US in last quarter, because the Model Y had record sales of 115,000, which is that beat its previous best of 100,000 in Q2 2024. But that's also like the quarter before was 86,000, the first quarter was 64,000, and then it was 85, 86. So 115,000 was a huge increase in Model Y sales in the third quarter. I would expect that that means we can expect a huge drop off in sales going forward in the next quarter or two. The Model 3 sales were not even records. They weren't even the second best Model 3 sales in the US in history. They were lower than Q3 and Q4 of last year. They're 54,000 compared to 58 and 58 last year in those quarters. So they barely had sales growth year over year, Tesla, in the US, whereas a lot of other companies had like dramatic sales growth. So I personally think without that special, huge boost from FSD, they're going to hit a big drop in sales. I also worry
without dramatically cutting prices. Realize Tesla does have another option. They don't have the option to sell gas cars like every other.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't talked about Rivian and those guys, but they could just cut prices dramatically.
I'm gonna let
going.
Larry jump in on the fantasies there, because I feel like that's what's gonna get really interesting. But I'll just add that I personally I see so many Teslas, and I increasingly see other EVs growing more. But I just wonder, like, what is the saturation rate? What is the rate where like there aren't that many more people who actually want to buy a Tesla? And this isn't Florida. In California, which has been the major market for Tesla, like, you see them everywhere. So it's like, I always wonder, like, how many more buyers can they find that are open to this new tech Tesla brand? So I really think the US market could see a dramatic hit, but I agree with you that they're the only company aside from Rivian or and some other pure EV company where their business relies on selling more EVs. So whereas the others might drop off, that might give them an opportunity, but at the very least, they're going to try to sell as many cars as they can in the US, which other automakers probably will not care that much about. They would be happy to go back to selling more gas cars. But I don't know. Larry or Steve, you want to jump in on the Tesla matter in the US market?
So recently I went to a Tesla dealer and I checked out the new standard models and rode around with FSD to see what the latest and greatest is doing. So for New York, I think FSD has a long way to go. It doesn't dodge potholes. It, takes turns a little bit too wide and then recorrects. And some of our roads are really narrow here. It doesn't read traffic very well. It pulled right in front of somebody who just had the light change.
And this was hardware 4.
Not something. Yep. What's that?
This was hardware 4, latest hardware.
Latest update that was available. I don't know if it was 14 or 13. Couldn't tell you. But in some places, I think it would work great. If you have wide lanes and you don't have very dense traffic and people don't, In the Philippines, where you have to kind of drive off of the facial expressions of the people in the lanes across, like it's not to that level of complexity. It's not thinking about like anticipating what the other driver's going to do. So I think it has a ways to go before it will drive sales. Looking at the standard models, I think that if you have somebody who's going in there who doesn't want to pay the extra money for FSD, that this is probably going to take sales away from their existing vehicles. And anytime you decontent a car, because all the features and options have much higher margin on them than the underlying vehicle, anytime you decontent a car, it's much harder to retain the same margins. I think that this can help maintain some sales for Tesla. I don't think it's going to be much of a margin driver for them because these vehicles will be lower margin. There's a chance of cannibalization. When I was on FSD, I entered navigation. They had the Benihana parking lot in navigation. It was a little ways away, so I hit that just to find some location to navigate to, just to test out the system. And when I get there, Teslas and Teslas and Teslas at this parking lot about a mile away, just backed up. It seems like they have a whole lot of inventory sitting at this location. This is totally anecdotal. Don't know what the overall inventory situation is nationally, but it doesn't seem like their sales would be impacted by a lack of product availability. It seems like they have the inventory. They had more sales last quarter than they'd had, or more sales than they had production last quarter. So I have a feeling that's going to lead to a reduction in sales. How much, can't tell you. A lot of it will depend on what the pricing situation is.
Yeah. My memory gets worse and worse. I think it was 2 years ago that I started just thinking that they had a sale. They, for the first time in like forever, they had consumer demand issue where they had to stimulate demand because they were reaching a point where they were producing more than they naturally, organically had demand for. Because they started just introducing more and more bonuses or deals or whatever. And I think it was about a year ago when I was at my local service center, and they had a lot of inventory, and a lot of it was not visible. Like you had to get access. So it was, yeah, that was like a year ago when they still did pretty well at maintaining sales with these different bonuses. So at the moment, I really think like this could be, I feel like Tesla's on this kind of race where like if they don't have a significant driver of new demand soon, they're going to have a huge supply and demand issue, I think. But yeah, we can move on from that unless anyone has anything else to say on Tesla, and we maybe briefly talk about the European market yeah. But I think the overall consensus here is that
I
hard to be
I
optimistic about
I
any.
actually have to go in about 10 minutes. So should I give my European thoughts and
Yeah.
then uh
Yeah.
I won't sign off, but I'll
Let's go. We'll try to do it all
okay.
in 10 minutes. I think that,
Oh, we'll try to do. Okay.
yeah, let's see what do you have to say on
Well,
the,
I have for the daily reporting markets, everybody says that Tesla did horrible in October. But I recently found that Roland Pritchard has given a plausible explanation for that. It's the traditional delivery wave. It's that there's no supply in Europe for October. And he knows a bunch of people that have ordered them even in September or October, and they all have late November or December delivery dates. Um, Looking a little longer, they do have some new product. They have the Model Y Performance, which actually I think we have in the US also, we didn't mention. And the Model Y Standard is much more competitive in Europe for a variety of reasons I covered in my article. One is it's not trying to make up for a $7,500 tax credit like in the US. It's just 5,000 cheaper than it's ever been. It does include autopilot, which in the US it doesn't. And versus the premium model, it varies by market, but it's 10,000 euros less than the premium, so it's a bigger delta there. Looking a little longer term, now this is just Germany, they have new incentives coming that'll be about 4,000 euros per car, and both the Model Y premium and the standard will qualify for it if the buyer is, low enough income. So that could potentially help starting January 1st. That being said, that's going to hurt fourth quarter sales because some people in December will say, I'll just wait until January when I can get the $4,000 credit. Talking other brands, I guess I'm a little pessimistic on VW. They like Stellantis, they have a lot of brands to manage, which could be an advantage or a disadvantage. I think they're kind of held hostage to by their unions and things that they want to do to streamline their business or set themselves up. They can't do because their union won't let them. And I just think, although they are trying to make better software with their partnerships with Rivian and Xpeng, um, their software has traditionally been a disaster.
So we talked a little bit before the call, and I think that the flip side of Volkswagen is they have strong brand preference already built in. So
Hmm.
even if MEB wasn't the greatest product ever, they're still going to get significant sales just because people love Volkswagen brands. They love Audi. They love a lot of their brands within that. And I think that that carries some inertia. I think feeding that inertia moving forward, the partnership with Xpeng from a technology perspective could dramatically improve their vehicles. And that could create a very compelling vehicle because Xpeng's doing some tremendous work on the software side right now in terms of robo taxis, full self-driving, as well as on the hardware side in terms of their new latest EVs and PHEVs. So I think that could drive that could help drive that. BMW, I think, is well positioned moving forward with their new class. They had a conversation in China saying that we're really thinking more as a global company instead of a German company, using all of our global resources. That is going to give them competitive advantage. I love the idea of lowering the belt line on vehicles. I'm one of those people like seeing out of it, and I want that trend to continue. So I'm wishing BMW all the best. BYD sales are up hundreds of percent from a low baseline. I feel like they're going to probably try and continue a very slow progress. Most of those sales are based off of the Song Plus, which is CLU in Europe. That product is being discontinued, and it's one of their less compelling models compared to the new C-Line 06 that's coming out. So they have enough resources and tools in their toolbox to kind of keep pushing that forward. I don't think they'll push it forward too quickly because they'll get political pushback. Stellantis is a very diverse company, and it's hard for me to really understand what's going on there. But, I
Yeah.
think that, the management of Stellantis is also trying to figure it out. Like Tavares tried. It's going to be a bit of a challenge. Renault, I think, is going to be interesting because they're deepening partnership with Geely. They're just opening a plant in Brazil together. They work on the horsepower train together. Geely is going very strong in Europe. Renault and Geely, if they were to somehow create a deeper partnership the way they used to have with Nissan, that could be a major driving force in terms of EVs in Europe. Speaking of Nissan, they just decided to pool their emissions credits with BYD. Is that part of the start of a new relationship? Like, I think that Nissan could use a technology partner moving forward. Now that they're being distanced from Renault, that's really kind of pie in the sky. How you lump together your emissions credits doesn't really say anything for sure, but it does signify a change within Nissan, which has some interesting product coming out, both in the US as well as in Europe.
Yeah, I'll jump in here because I have some similar remarks. So I'm basing all this on this monthly reports that Jose Pontes does for us. He does a very detailed, European EV sales report. It takes forever to get through it, but I'm going to pull out a few highlights. But before that, there's one. He dropped a comment in the writer chat yesterday that he heard the BMW iX had 6 months of backlog reservations already, like that it's got huge demand already. So it seems like BMW might be onto something, as you were noting. But regarding Volkswagen Group, he also highlights that it had 27.6% share of the plug-in vehicle market in Europe in September, which, with its rising and Tesla's dropping in the US, is getting comparable to Tesla's dominant share in the US, which is pretty fascinating because you don't really hear nearly as much about it, or it doesn't get highlighted as much, especially with all the different brands. But almost 30% share of the European EV market, plug-in vehicle market, is enormous. And like you said, it's the way it's got its brands diversified and solidified. It seems like it should do fine, especially, as you know, if the technology gets better with partnership with Xpeng. But then you've got BYD, which, its sales grew 404% in September. And I think the most interesting thing to me is its share of the plug-in vehicle market rose to 4.6%. And I mean, that, for comparison, Tesla's, it rose as well, from 5.7 to 6.3%, but that again was the end of quarter month for it. So 4.6% is getting close already to Tesla's share of the European market. Again, this is plug-in vehicles overall, because they've been more or less blocked on competing easily with battery electric vehicles with the high tariffs there. There's no tariffs, there's no extra tariffs on plug-in hybrids. So BYD and others have been like, okay, we'll sell more plug-in hybrids here, which it's just weird policy, weird situation in Europe with all that. But at the moment, it seems like it's doing better than I expected it would do this quickly. And so the potential, when you see how well it does elsewhere, especially in China, is like it could get big in Europe as well. So that's another really interesting, I think, company and trend to watch in Europe. But those are the big ones for me in Europe, like the big interesting notes. And then overall, Chinese OEMs grew 149% in September in Europe. So there's a few of them, Leap Motor as well, Xpeng, Neo, different ones. But it's a pretty stable market. I think it's been sort of just coasting since they got the emissions requirements weakened, spread out across a longer time frame. But I think that they're prepping for, I think most of these companies are prepping for a significant increase in sales, electric vehicle sales, again next year. And I think we'll see a big boom again. But we can see that they're able to be stable at a pretty high percentage already. And there's more and more competition. And it is funny because Tesla, the Model Y, and the Model 3 stand out above the crowd as the top selling models in Europe, which gets a lot of Tesla fans really excited, and they are convinced that Tesla's dominating the market, whereas it really only has about 5 to 6% of the market, and Geely has 7.7%, Hyundai, Kia have 8%, Stellantis has 8.5%. And even, like, it feels like a company that's constantly trying to herd cats. So it is a weird company, but it's got a much stronger situation in Europe than elsewhere. So I don't know. I think it's unclear what's going to happen in Europe as well, of course, but I think it's got a much more clear trajectory and kind of patterns of growth than the U.S. for sure. And I think we can continue to see some of these leading companies just get more share while others stagnate. Uh, Larry's gonna you chime in again before Steve.
I think that there's something to say about collaboration. And, we say it's a Chinese company, but BYD is building up hundreds of thousands of units of capacity in Europe. And even though we think about that as one company, and even though they're very vertically integrated, that's going to create a supply chain for electric vehicles within that, which helps to provide parts and different kind of components to other manufacturers. We're seeing a lot more collaborative approach with Geely and Renault. We're seeing more collaboration with Leap and Stellantis. I feel like you're going to see a situation kind of quickly evolve to the point where the lines get blurred between what's Chinese, what's traditional European automaker. You're already seeing in Italy, BYD's number one in terms of plug-in sales, Spain, Portugal, a lot of these areas that they don't have like the largest market, but they also don't have the established players. I feel like you're going to see more integration within the supply chain between the two different forces, and more collaboration happening between companies. And that collaboration is really what's going to drive the European market, more than entrants or domestics. It's not us versus them, it's us together. That's what's really going to kind of drive this market forward.
It's interesting, the us versus them, Larry. Um, it seems to me that the current mindset in the United States is we're against everything, and we're against renewable energy. We're against electric cars. We're all for data centers, even if we have to burn coal to power them. Um, it just the people that I in my community are looking at me and saying, why do you need an electric car? You just go out and buy a Lexus like everybody else. Um, the one thing that I think we need to be aware of is the statement by Mark Carney just a few days ago, saying that Canada is considering doing away with its 100% tariff on Chinese-made cars. Well, they're just up there across the border. If Chinese-made cars start competing in Canada the way they are in Europe, I think that puts a lot of pressure on the United States. People in Minnesota are going to be pretty upset when they find out that people on the other side of the border are buying a very competitive electric car for 10 or 12 or $15,000 less than they can buy one. And I mean, you guys might not be old enough to remember this, but when Yugo came in um, back in the late, sometime in the 80s, I guess, it was a terrible car, but they were cheap, and they sold everyone they could screw, bolt, and glue together. Um, it just seems to me that price is always king, and if the electric cars get to the point where they are significantly more affordable than uh, conventional cars, then the question will be whether economics or politics is going to prevail.
I think you're muted, Larry. I believe you're muted. Did you mute yourself? Not hearing you, but yeah, jump in whenever. It's weird because yeah, you were talking a moment ago. Uh, I will just to carry on with that a little bit. I do think that the trend that Michael Liebrick highlighted and I highlighted recently with how much the Nissan Leaf's range and specs have improved since the first Leaf, while the price has remained the same, is a big deal. And there's like an underlying, like they've used all of these battery improvements to increase range for the past decade, because range wasn't where it was acceptable for most buyers. And they just kept increasing range to expand the market to make it more viable for people to buy EVs. And I think that's sort of quietly that's kept quiet how much the technological revolution has been underway. And now I think more and more it's to the point where, like Ford has talked about and Chinese OEMs are doing, they can actually start lowering prices while keeping specs the same more and more with these battery improvements. So instead of just increasing range at the same cost, they can start keeping range and lowering price. And like you said, the more that that's available in other markets, especially Canada north of the border, the more that's gonna bring real disruption, like we've seen ahead of time, early on, you can say, in Norway and now China. And I with the Canada situation too, there's so many jobs, there's so much of a interplay of jobs and economic activity between the two countries because of the shared kind of auto market up there, that I think is really like, if they do let that, if they do drop that and Chinese EVs become a bigger and bigger portion of the market, that's going to hurt the U.S. economy, especially up in the auto manufacturing regions of the country, a great deal, I think, and we're going to pay the price for that.
Well,
Larry,
Zach, most of the cars in Canada are made by U.S. owned companies. And so if Canada does drop their import fees, then those companies are going to have to compete in Canada for customers with the Chinese companies. And that's going to be a wake-up call for them. I don't know if they're going to be able to do it.
I can see Larry's been trying to figure. And yeah, you weren't muted. I could see that you're not muted. So something went wrong with the wire. Maybe the cat got something. I don't know. Well, I'll wrap up here unless Larry gets his audio going again. But I want to highlight some more stuff here in Europe. Oh, was that you or Steve? I heard a click. No, that was Steve, I think. Um, yeah. So Tesla has had the Model Y and Model 3 on top of the charts in Europe for a while now. And one of the interesting things Jose Pontes has been pointing out is that there's a very high chance the Model 3 doesn't end up number 2 on the podium or even on the podium at all, because right behind it now, you have the Skoda Elroq, you have the Volkswagen ID4, you have the BYD CLU, you have the Renault 5, and you have the Volkswagen ID3. So you have 5 models that are right on its tail when you look at January through September sales. The Model Y will end up on top. It's clear ahead, but this is like BYD could end up on the podium, on the top 3 podium for models, and it's even pushing to get on the brand podium, but it's going to be a change at the top there where it's the Model 3, it doesn't seem like Tesla's able to keep the Model 3 up on top unless this decontented lower price Model 3 does wonders in Europe, but probably more likely the Model Y gets a boost, the Model 3 maybe gets a little boost, but who knows? They do buy a lot more sedans in Europe. But for my time living there, when I lived there for 11 years, when I went there, they had like almost no SUVs or crossovers. And when we moved, they were like the dominant type of new vehicle. So just like in the US, people have gravitated more and more to these larger, higher riding vehicles. Something happened to Larry's tech, but we will wrap it up there. I think there's it's going to be an interesting end of the year in the US and in Europe, and we'll be reporting on those sales for sure, very closely. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Larry, Paul, Steve.
Until next time.